Hello. There we go. We're on. Ready to go. Let's just make sure this is working. All good. Hello, everybody. I was gonna say welcome to the GDG. I mean, welcome to the GDG, but I think I don't have to. I think everyone's basically been before. There's a couple of new faces, but yeah. So welcome to the GDG. Thank you for being here. So for those people in the room who haven't been before, the Game Dev Group is a community of game developers who get together twice a month now to meet, learn, collaborate, say hello to one another. So the reason I say hello is because it used to be the case that I'd come around and say hello to everybody. I'll try and do that tonight, but sometimes I don't get the chance. So there's lots of people in the audience who've been a few times. Everyone's very friendly. Everyone's into games. Everyone's into making games. So it's a very easy conversation starter. Just walk up to people, say hello. That's what I do. Just walk up to a group, interrupt and say, how's it going? Yeah, welcome to the GDG. I like to just always start these events by saying thank you to everybody who's involved. It's absolutely not a solo effort anymore. It's very much a community effort. So first and foremost is Dee Dee. Dee Dee's not in the room at the moment. She's working late, I think, but she will be here later. She basically helps me put all of these together now. I'm now working basically full-time on sorcery.gg, which some of you may have heard of, which is a game stores platform. But so Dee Dee has picked up the sort of day-to-day management of the GDG, so can't thank her enough for all the work that she puts in. Also, thank you to the community. So to everyone who sort of gets stuck in and makes the GDG a nice place to be. If you're not on the Discord, you can get there through that link. I'll put that up again later as well. But yeah, just thank you to everyone who gets stuck in. We've got a game jam coming up. And so, yeah, to everyone who's sort of taking part in that and getting stuck in on that, thank you. Like I say, it's a community effort, making sure that this is a welcoming space. Big thanks as well to the speakers who each month, I say each month, it's been about 4 months since the last speaker event. So, but yeah, each month from now, give their time and their experience and their expertise to make this such a valuable experience. So massive thanks to them. Without people like Andy, it wouldn't be possible to run these events in the way that we do. So thank you very much. Big thanks as well to everyone who has sort of been involved with the GDG in the time that we've been running with Interactive Futures, which we ran last year. So all the sponsors, Maverick Games, who are headlined at Interactive Futures, but Rebellion, Playground, Code Wizards, SAE, Super Slime, Fish in a Bottle, Drew's here, so thank you, Drew. Masters, Black Cat, and obviously 1 Mill Street, which is the home of the GDG and has been for the last 2.5 years. So massive thanks to them. They're all wonderful. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started completely. There are toilets here, but once the talk gets going, please don't use them. Obviously, once it's all finished, welcome to. But there's the toilets just around the corner there as well. So if you need one, please just go there. Please don't take any glass or drinks or anything outside. If you want to go out for a chat or to go and get wet because it's raining, then please just leave your drinks inside because the venue can lose their license if there's glass go outside. So yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping. Also, what we've got coming up, Bring Your Own Games on Friday the 6th, which is next week. We're doing a very special event next week because we do BYOG. We've been doing BYOG for the last 2 years. But next week we've got SAE. So if any of you were at Interactive Futures, SAE, they're a university campus, the games course just over the road. They did a design your own boss battle kind of paper prototyping thing with their game design lecturer. It was really good fun. Like, got loads of cool ideas out. They're going to be doing something similar. So we're going to have that going on in the middle of the room. And then the students from SAE are bringing their student projects along to play as well. And then there'll be, you know, indies and people working on their own stuff, bringing them along and getting them played. So yeah, cool event next week. Also, we do some work with the University of Warwick. They've got their own section of the Discord because they've got their esports centre where they're sort of booking it out to do QA. They've got a load of gaming PCs and things that they rent out time on, loaded with games, and do esports and stuff there. But they're also doing courses at the moment as well. So they've got one on UEFN, which they're running over the next month or two. UFN's really cool. I don't know if anyone's ever tried using it. I built a game in it. It's a pretty cool process and also obviously UGC is like quite a big thing up and coming. So if you fancy giving that a go, you can scan that code or have a look in the Discord and jump on from there. Also, any indies in the audience, I can see 1, 2, 3, cool. If you've got a game that you want to show off, Chris, DreamHack, I've got a call with them on Monday. They've been trying to get in touch with me to basically give some space at DreamHack for indies, but I'll find out on Monday what that actually entails. So no promises, but just to sort of tee it up, reach out to me next week and I'll give you more information on if we've got stuff going on there. But yeah, otherwise, March 27th, 29th looks like a pretty cool show. We're also doing through Sorcery, or with Sorcery, we basically, Sorcery platform, you build a portfolio. It's kind of like ArtStation meets LinkedIn. The idea is that it's a space for anyone in game dev to build a portfolio and then be able to apply for jobs on the platform using that portfolio as a sort of quick apply process. We're going to be releasing a feature soon on the back end, which allows recruiters and hirers to kind of go in and source people, talent, using the portfolios. We're concentrating at the moment on game designers, and so we just want to know what makes a good portfolio for a game designer. So we're going to be running an event, just getting some feedback, doing some workshops, and getting people signed up to portfolios on Sorcery. So it'd be great if any of you are happy to come along and give us some support on that. That'd be wonderful. That is March 26th. I think that's it from me. Oh, otherwise, if you want to follow along with what we're doing, and you're not on Meetup or Discord, go to linktree/GGG. That's where everything gets posted these days. If you want to post any photos or anything on LinkedIn, hashtag the GDG. And then I think Meetup's going to send you all a kind of how did you find the event. If it does, please give us a thumbs up. I think it's more star system. If you like the event, and give us 5 stars, that'd be wonderful. That helps us be the biggest, best community that we can be, and reach the most people that we can. So that's it, I think. So I'm going to pass over to Andy, who is giving an awesome talk on automation. So thank you. We give Andy a big round of applause. Thanks.
If you click over the left.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Hello. I know some of you already. That's great. It's nice to see some familiar faces. It's nice to see a whole bunch of new people as well. I haven't been to Leamington out for Dev Meetup in Leamington for a long time, so it's great to see some of you. I'm going to be talking today about productive and pragmatic prototype programming, which is maybe not the sexiest of topics to choose, but I think it's a really interesting topic once I get into it. But before I do that, let me tell you a bit about myself. Excuse me. I've been working in the games industry for about 20 years, a whole range of titles, different genres, from racing to puzzle games to platformers to action games. I've worked on a whole ton of platforms, from mobile to console to PC, everything apart from the Ouya, basically. And right now, I run a company called Automated AF. We help studios with build servers and with test automation, basically everything from when you commit code to when the build reaches QA. And if that's something you're interested in, you should talk to me afterwards. And I also run Brum Indies, the rival meetup to GDG, which some of you I know have already been to. If you haven't been before, you're more than welcome to join us over in Birmingham. It's right next to New Street Station, and the next one's on the 18th of March. But when I'm not doing those things, for the last 10 years, off and on, I've been leading prototype teams at studios like SEGA Hardlight in Edmonton, SpryFox and Roll7, studios which are arguably known for game feel, for interesting, innovative gameplay mechanics. I think especially maybe Roll7, which is the last place I worked. If you know Roll7 at all, it's from games like Ollie Ollie World and Rollerdrome. These are games that have really, really strong game feel, really tight connection between the player and the controller and what's happening on screen. And we got that partly through a vigorous amount of prototyping, right? And we had a very healthy relationship with prototyping. I had programmers on my team as a lead programmer. I would have programmers who were particularly good at programming, who I would see them like diving into a project, really getting to the core of the gameplay very quickly, collaborating really well with the designers. It's almost like they were like Han Solo and a band of outlaws soaring across the possibility space, cutting corners and being cheeky and but really getting the job done, right? And really destroying the evil empire of not getting a game signed, I guess. But when I went and talked to them and I asked them, you know, you're one of my best prototype programmers. How do I get my other programmers to be as good as you at prototyping? And they'll be like, it's just what I do, right? I just mashing my fingers and game comes out. And so I went and I talked to other programmers in the studio and I was like, well, what do you think makes a really good programmer? And they were a prototype programmer. And they were like, public statics? And I was like, okay, well, if I want to know more about this sort of thing, if I want to help those good prototype programmers become excellent, then I really want to know more about this. And I want to figure out what actually fundamentally makes a prototype programmer. And so I went where I normally go to like the GDC Vault or to YouTube and watch a whole bunch of talks about prototyping. And you can find a bunch of really good talks about that on there. But they're all about prototyping from a design point of view. This one's a particularly good one. About Goshima, really, really good, meaty details about how programmers collaborate with designers, which is good, which is interesting, right? And you can also find talks on how to do rapid prototyping. This one, if you know, really fantastic talk about how to use constrained resources to produce really good results. You can have programming talks at GDC that might be about optimization, might be about really technical details, or how to produce a wonderful, rich world with only just a little bit of prop gen and 10 years of effort. And you could go outside of the games industry and have more interesting technical talks that go really deep on certain levels of programming, right? And you can read books. This is a particularly good book about how to structure your code in such a way that it's useful, but it's really aimed at like kind of production. Or you can look at kind of the progenitor of this style of book, Pragmatic Programming. It's a really excellent book about the craft of programming, but none of these are really talking about what is the fundamental difference when you're doing semicolons in a prototype from doing semicolons in production. And so I guess if you want a job doing, I figured I'd just do it. But why do I want it? So I mentioned one of the reasons I want to do this is because I want to understand what makes prototyping code good. Because if we do that, we can help those good prototyping programmers become excellent. But I also, when I was thinking more about it, there's this, those of you in this room who've worked on games in production, you will have understood this moment that's actually a little bit risky, where you transition from prototyping into production. This moment where you can make mistakes that you won't actually realize you've made for another 2 years to the game ships, and you're like, oh, we really screwed ourselves here. And I think partly this is because we understand where we're going. We have a good understanding of what production code looks like, but because we don't have this vocabulary about prototyping code, we don't know where we're coming from. And if we don't know where we're coming from, but we know where we're going to, like, you can get lost on the way, I think. So I was really interested in coming to some kind of understanding about this. And so I decided this is what I want to talk to you today about, is I want to talk to you about a theory and language of writing prototype code at small to medium-sized design-first studios. And this is going to be the rarest of programming talks. and you non-programmers would be pleased to hear this, the rarest of programming talks where there's not be a single line of code in this whole talk. This is not about programming as a technical skill. This is about programming as, from a point of view of philosophy, of like, what are actual constraints on the code that we're writing here? And talking of constraints, like I've said some things here, like small to medium size, just because I want to talk to you about the context of my experiences, right? I've worked on prototype teams of 2 people to 12 people that transition into production of, 20 to 40 people. That's where my experiences lie. And those have been designed for studios, which is a bit of a bullshit term. But here, what I'm really saying is these are studios who are more interested in coming up with interesting novel mechanics than, say, telling an interesting story, than, say, really deep, rich, technical, pushing the technical envelope in interesting ways, right? These are studios who are focused on just making new mechanics and having a really good game. Which isn't to say, if you don't fit into these buckets, the rest of the talk will be useless to you. I just wanted to give you the context of how I'm speaking so you can contextualize it as I come to some decisions. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is prototyping, just so we're all on the same page there. We're going to talk about why prototyping code is different. Now we understand what prototyping is. How does that impact prototyping code? And then how can we use that understanding to affect our practice of writing prototype code and production code? And I know that the best talks have rich, detailed examples, but I also know that prototyping is a necessarily commercially sensitive situation. And I also know that the last studio I worked at, where I did the most prototyping the most recently, is now shut. So I can't do a talk where I say to you, here's a situation, and this is exactly what we did in this situation. So the compromise is that together today, we are going to walk through the prototype of a new game that I've come up with, a new novel concept I've come up with. And this novel concept can be summarized as a multiplayer survival game set in a procedural voxel 3D world. If you know any publishers, let me know. I'd love to talk to some people. So let's get started. Let's talk about what is a prototype. Give me 1 second. Let me maximize my preview here. There we go. So what is a prototype? I said already that there's a plethora of interesting talks on the internet about what makes good prototyping from a design point of view. So I don't want to go into a huge amount of deep detail here, but what I do want to do is give you some understanding of what approaches I've seen work so that we have this shared language rather than me saying one thing and you in your head imagining something else. So for me, a definition of a prototype is an interactive experience that helps you answer questions. And I'm necessarily vague here, right? I don't care how it's interactive or how much it's interactive. I don't care what kind of experience it is, and I don't really care what kind of questions it's answering. But the aim here is to answer questions as opposed to anything else, as opposed to shipping a game, as opposed to making money, as opposed to signing deals, any of that stuff. But what kind of questions? I said it doesn't really matter what kind of questions, but let's give some examples just so we have that understanding that I already talked about. I like to approach this, because I'm a programmer, I like to approach this from a recursive point of view. So I like starting with a really, really, really big question. So one really big question that you might want to answer with your prototype is, what should our next production game be? What should we work on next? And that's a decent question to start with, right? And then you would take that question. Oh, is it not updating on the screen? I'm 3 or 4 slides ahead of you there. What have I done there, Nathaniel?
Sure. Oh no.
Is it just because I had a maximum?
There we go. Yeah, it must be. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, let's see if I can half maximize it and still convince the thing to work. There we go. Let's see what happens. Okay, yeah. So we'll take that question and then we'll try to recurse into it. So we'll break it down into smaller questions. And one smaller question might be, what kind of experience do we want the player to have? How do we want them to feel when they're playing the game? And if we take that question, we can then break that down and say, well, what kind of tools and mechanics do we need as game developers to help enact that feeling in the player? And if you break that down, you might say, well, okay, what kind of feedback does the player need when they're encountering one of these mechanics? So we've gone from a very general question of what kind of game are we going to work on next? What is our actual next game going to be? All the way to like literally what VFX do we need? And you can drill down, answer these questions, and then once you've answered them, pop all the way back up, and then you have a good understanding of what your next thing is going to be. So if we contextualize those questions in terms of our Minecraft game, then the type of feeling that we might want the player to have would be, one example would be feeling on the edge of disaster, of never quite being able to never being able to make long-term plans, never being able to, having to adapt constantly and improvise because things are going wrong, never feeling certain and never feeling safe. If we're doing that, one of the tools that might be useful as developers for that is an enemy like, say, the Creeper. And if you've literally never played Minecraft, the Creeper is this relatively benign enemy who just walks up to you and explodes and does nothing else. And they're not that hard to kill and they're not that dangerous, but they explode and they cause a lot of damage, right? And they leave a big hole in the ground and they destroy your stuff and they might destroy the floor you're standing on and they might hurt you physically. So that can definitely contribute towards that idea of like not feeling certain and feeling unsafe and having to improvise it. And what kind of feedback do we want to give the player so that the Creeper can be as effective as it can be? And obviously one thing we need is an explosion. We need a big hole in the ground. And so we have a concrete question now. How big should the Creeper's explosion be? That's a question that we can answer with a prototype. And if we do that and answer similar questions, we can recurse all the way back to, is the Creeper a good idea? Is feeling unsafe a good idea? Is Minecraft the next game we want to make? So if we move on to physically prototyping the Creeper now, we've got a couple of options, right? We obviously don't want to make a fully realized photorealistic Creeper. I won't apologize for that picture. That's the whole point of prototyping, right? That's the raison d'etre, is that we're not going to do this. We're not going to make the highest fidelity AAA Creeper in our prototype. What we're going to do instead is make something really simple and really dumb. But if I just took a green Post-it note and waved it in front of your face and said, is this a good Creeper or not? You won't be able to give me the right kind of feedback. So you need to find a balancing point between these two extremes. Chris Zimmerman, who did that Ghost of Tsushima talk, he talks about a clear path to victory for every one of the features you're working on. You want to take your feature, you want to implement a simplified version of your feature such that someone playing it has a very clear understanding of what the final version will be. And that, so basically you need, another way of saying it is you need something as simple as it can be, but no simpler. You don't want to give anyone any ambiguity when they're playing your prototype or what the final version may be, because they'll give you feedback on that final version. They'll imagine what that final version will be. They'll be imagining this normal mapped monstrosity on the right and giving you feedback on that rather than the thing that's right in front of them right now. As simple as it can be, no simpler. And so you've got two real tools in your belt to help you do that, to help you make that simplification. One is a mission. Right, so our Creeper walks up to you and explodes. We can make a supposition that if you see a Creeper coming, you're going to turn and run the other way, most likely. And so he's not actually going to be on screen for that long. If he didn't animate, is that going to really ruin the feedback that we get with our prototype? And I would say no. I would say that there's a clear path to victory here. Anyone playing this game and seeing this Creeper foot slide across the environment could imagine what the final animated version of this would be, and I don't think it would affect how they would judge the feedback on this thing. Not to say that animation isn't super important. If there's any animators in the room, I'm not saying that you should put animation in your prototype. I'm just saying in this particular situation, where it's not on the screen, this is an opportunity for devoting your animation resources elsewhere. Conversely, what about audio? The Creeper was going to hiss, or was going to do something. In the real Minecraft, the Creeper hisses right before they explode, which means if they're right behind you, you get some warning and you can react. Because you getting destroyed without having any notion of it happening would be a bad player experience. And so we can't necessarily omit this kind of feedback. You could do something else, right? You could have some kind of marker on screen. But if you omitted that, there wouldn't be a clear path to victory. Whoever's playing the game would be like, well, I don't know how they're going to signal that the Creeper is right behind me. Are they going to do it with an on-screen marker? Are they going to do it with audio? Are they going to do screen shake or whatever? So you would need something like this, I would say, in a creeper prototype. But emitting isn't your only tool you've got here. You've also got reducing complexity. When our creeper explodes, we've already talked about it's going to leave a big hole on the floor. Have you ever, I hadn't done this until I did this talk, but sat and looked at a Minecraft hole? Like, they're kind of amazing. They're considering like the scale of the grid. They're natural looking and craggy. They're not repetitive. They're interesting. And if you go look on the Minecraft wiki, there's a whole algorithm there about rays emanating from the center and dice rolls when it crosses a tile boundary. It sounds really interesting, and probably took them quite a while to iterate on that to come up with something good. If instead we simplified, we just had 3 for loops that splattered out a cube, is that going to tell us how we're still going to be batting out the same volume of ground, and so the players playtesting are still going to be able to give us a certain amount of feedback about how big should this crater be, how much damage should it do to the player. So we can reduce complexity here and get to a playtest faster by doing this. And then we can use those 2 tools. So we can go into a loop. We could be looking at a particular question. We can take our idea and simplify it. We can go straight into implementation, do that implementation as fast as possible, get it to some kind of playtest, which is probably initially just playtesting with yourself and with your colleagues, maybe other friends and family you know, maybe eventually wider playtest services or public events like GDG's event coming up in March. But that's a whole science in itself. That's a whole talk that I'm not going to go into. But you can take data from that prototype, from that playtest, and ask yourself, did we answer the question? Not, is this good? Did we answer the question that we set out to answer, which is, how big should the creeper's explosion be? And maybe we did. But I would say, more often than not, you want to lean towards, if there's any doubt, lean towards saying no. The more often you say no, the more often you can go into this loop and ask the question again, ask it slightly differently, get slightly different data, is going to give you way more certainty when you finally get to yes. The best teams I know who do this, they're running around this loop, maybe twice a day, maybe even faster, making changes, playtesting it, seeing what they like, going on to the next idea. And when they say yes, they finish this, they go on to the next thing, and they go on to the next question to answer. Now, note what I didn't say. I didn't say they go on and they put animation on the creeper, or they go back and they make that hole look pretty. They go on to answering the next question, because the only important thing is answering that big question of what should our next production game be. What we're doing here is not making a demo. We're not making a little game. We're making a prototype. That's a fundamentally different thing. So that's one big difference, right? That we're not making a demo. We're making a prototype. There are other differences, some of them more obvious than others, right? We've talked about how we're plucky rebels soaring across the possibility space. We are necessarily going to have less scale than production. That's the whole point. It's the tautology. But I want to enumerate it anyway. This applies almost as much to scope, right? We're going to have less content in our prototype than we would have in the final game. Our Minecraft game might only have a few biomes, a few enemies, a few tools, part of the tech tree, and that will give us enough context to answer our questions. But it also might have less features. You only need the features you need to ship your game. You might very well find that your prototype doesn't ever need a volume slider, for instance. Some prototypes never need a save game. These things that you couldn't get away with not shipping in a production game, you can get away with not implementing in your prototype. You're going to have more throwaway work. Because you're saying no to questions, sometimes you're going to say no. You're going to say the creeper isn't going to go into our Minecraft game, and we're going to try something else. All that creeper code can come out, or it can stay. If you're a masochist, you can leave it in. People love to think, oh, I'm going to use it someday. You're not going to use it someday, just delete it. But you're going to have more situations where you're throwing stuff away. We like to pretend it doesn't happen in production, but it will. And then finally, the thing we were alluding to before, when we ship our production game, we're going to ship to countless anonymous players. We hope countless anonymous players. Whereas if we contrast that with a prototype, when we finish with the prototype, when we've answered the big question, the prototype stops. It doesn't ship. It becomes an artifact. It becomes something we've learned about, that we can use that knowledge in the future, but it doesn't become something that goes out and people play or it ships on the store. And So if the audience for our prototype are not these countless anonymous players, who is the audience for our prototype? And we can learn stuff about that as well. Our audience for prototype, we probably know exactly who they are. We probably know them by name, because they're probably initially us. They're probably initially our family and friends. They're probably people we meet at GDG. Maybe they're professional playtest services. If they even are those playtest services, you'll still know those people's names. So it's a very personal experience, a thing you can tailor to individuals if you really want to. And not only do you know their names, but they're amenable to briefing. You do not need to fully tutorialize your prototype so someone can play it in isolation without any supervision. This is something where you can give them some briefing beforehand, some paper, or an in-person briefing where you can warn them about possible known issues, or give them some tutorialization that they wouldn't have had because you haven't built that system yet. And we know what hardware they're going to play on. It'll probably be our own dev laptops, almost certainly, initially. And even after that, we'll be able to make higher judgments. We'll be able to have higher restrictions around specs than we would have if this was a production game. It's okay for us to say, hey, this is a prototype. Don't play this on a 2080. Don't play this on a Chromebook. Like, you need to play this on your proper gaming PC. We know how long they're going to play. Most times it will be time limited, but even if it's not time limited, like, you'll have a decent understanding of how much content is in this prototype. It won't be hours and hours and hours and hours. And you'll have some way of observing. This might be through analytics, this might be through feedback forms, or it might be that you could just directly watch them play. But this is very, very different to shipping a production game where if you get any kind of analytics there, it's much more of a fire hose that you can't process in the same way. And then finally, they've got a much bigger tolerance. These people are playing a prototype. They understand what they're in for. They understand there's going to be some bugs. They're not going to leave a bad review on your Steam page. And so if you take that understanding of an audience, if you take that understanding of the differences between prototype and production, if you take that understanding of a prototype as a way of answering questions, then you can come up with a theory of prototype and code, which is, relatively simply, it's just avoiding work is a prototype. It's the art of understanding that we don't need all the features. It's the art of understanding that we know exactly who's playing our game and what cadences they're going to be playing it at and what kind of equipment they're going to be playing it on. And we can avoid doing some things that we would otherwise be doing for a production game. And I think these types of avoided work fall into three buckets. The first one is smoke and mirrors. So this is making the game look bigger than it is, making it look like we've done more work than we have. The second one is known issues. That is, things that are problems and issues that are in the game, or might not even be an issue. It might be an aspect of the game that's not ideal, but it's not currently getting in the way of us answering the questions. And so we can leave it in the title, leave it in the prototype. And then finally, performance. Right? We can take advantage of the fact that we know what these dev machines are, and we don't necessarily have to optimize our game as heavily as we would have to if we were shipping production. Let's look at those in detail. So smoke and mirrors then, on our Minecraft game, we know we want procedural generation. And if you had asked me 10 years ago to work on a procedural generation prototype, I would have been like, fantastic. Talk to me in 4 months. I'm going to have such a good time working on a prop gen system. It's going to be amazing. And then we would have come to the point of like, okay, well, let's get the character jumping around. And after 4 months, the designers would have been like, actually, you know what? We can't make a character jumping around in this world that's interesting in any way. That makes it stand out, that makes it worth continuing this prototype. So I wasted 4 months working on that procedure generation code. Much better, in hindsight, to handcraft things. We have tools already in all of the most common game engines for creating 3D worlds very, very easily. Level design is a skill that exists in the world. Just lean on that and create a hand-spun environment that you can start asking questions about movement, platforming, and combat, and you can start asking these questions in this environment without having to wait 4 months for procedure generation to spin up. So that's smoke and mirrors, right? It might look like we have a procedural world, it might look like we've got this lush 3D environment, but really you build it all by hand. Another example is crafting. So if we're asking the question of how should we move about this world, how should we do combat, you might want to do it in the context of the fuller game. But a full Minecraft crafting system involves a pick and place UI, it involves timers, and it involves queuing, and it involves resources and configs and tech trees and all this stuff that makes it relatively complicated to bootstrap. What if instead you just asked an artist to mock up some PNGs, like a little storyboard, and we could have a little hot zone, and you click on the hot zone, it just goes to the next PNG. And it's in no way interesting to play, but it gives you, it's evocative, right, of what the final thing may be. And in that context, you can evaluate other features. You can't ship this. Can't ship this. You're going to have to work on crafting before you finish the prototype. But when you get to crafting, ripping this out will be really, really easy. And in the meantime, you've got this context to work on the rest of the prototype. Yeah, you keep clicking through the storyboard. Known issues then. We talked about not animating our creeper, like omitting that animation entirely so they're foot sliding across the environment. And it would be a waste of the cognitive load of the player for them to finish playing the demo and then turn and give you the feedback and say, the game was pretty good. By the way, the creeper's broken, the animation's not working. Much better to give them a heads up beforehand and say, it's not a bug. We've done this intentionally. The creeper doesn't animate, just to free them up from that mental load. But there were, I mean, that's obviously intentional, but there were non-intentional known issues as well, obviously. Now we're working on our server system for our Minecraft game, and it turns out there's a memory leak. And the system is slowly filling up with memory over time. And we spent some time investigating, but it's becoming a can of worms. However, because we understand our audience, we understand people are only playing this game, a limited number of people in limited time zones, and we could just set a cron job to reboot the server at midnight. And it's fine. Right? We go on to prototyping the next day. Can't ship it. We know we can't ship that, but that's okay, because this is a prototype. Prototypes don't ship. And then finally, performance. We're doing a voxel game. We're going to want a voxel engine. But finding the right voxel engine and integrating it might be a bit time consuming. Turns out, if you just put a bunch of static mesh cubes in the world, it works fine. Loading times are all right on our beefy dev machines. The frame rate is pretty good on our beefy dev machines. The tooling, not fantastic, right? But it does for now, it works for now. We can do this, and we can take that performance hit to get back the fact that we've avoided doing anything around properly implementing voxel engine. Similarly, we might end up giving our prototype to QA, and they come back with an issue like this, where they manage to find one creeper and kite them around until they find another, and then they find another, and soon enough they got tens of creepers on screen and their frame rates hit the floor. And this is a situation where you high-five QA, because it's exactly the kind of thing we love QA for, is finding these kind of edge cases. But it's also okay to say in this situation, you know what? I don't think this is going to happen in our limited number of hours of play testing that people are going to spend on this prototype. So we can ignore this issue. It means we can do the dumbest Unity monobehavior update AI you've ever seen for the creeper, and it's not going to matter too much. You don't have to spend time writing fancy ECS system so you can have hundreds of creepers on screen, because we understand in the context of the prototype, as it stands right now, that's not going to be a problem. So that's the three types of work that I think you avoid well in a prototype. Is there a type of work I've talked about that I haven't mentioned avoiding? And one of them is, those public statics. That's what people think about when they probably, some of you thought when I said I'm going to talk about prototype programming, you were like, okay, you're going to teach us how to break encapsulation. You're going to teach us how to turn off warnings as errors. You're going to teach us how to stop adding comments to our code and how to add a class to a file instead of doing file new for a new class. Just so we can get going as fast as possible. Teach us all those tricks so we can get as quick as possible from design to a playable thing. And I'm telling you, it's not. You should actually keep doing that stuff. You should actually keep doing encapsulation and the solid principles and all the stuff that we came up with in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s to make software modular and reusable. Because you know what? You know where we might need software that's easy to adapt? In a prototype. That's a situation where you're going to be changing direction a lot, where you're going to be trying new features quickly, and you're going to want to be able to take systems and reuse them in interesting new ways because they're written in such a way that makes them reusable. Do you know where you don't need stuff like that so much? In production. You know relatively well in production that you're going to have these number of enemies and you're going to have this like voxel system. And so maybe we've got this all backwards. And for a long time, programmers, including myself for a long time, were like, well, prototyping is the place where we can be sloppy, we can break the rules. Actually, maybe the place where we can be sloppy is in production. Because we know where we're going then, and we don't need code that's so rigid. But over here in prototyping, we do need code that's modifiable and modular and reusable. And this is the place where we should actually be using those techniques. And we know this is a fact, right? You know this deep down, because those things, like just put in public in front of a variable, so you don't have to write a getter, those things are about saving you keystrokes. And hands up, if you've ever worked as a professional programmer, if you've ever applied to a programming job, a few of you have applied to programming jobs, keep your hand up if that programming job had typing speed. Right? So why do you care about saving keystrokes here? We don't care about any other point in development do we care about saving keystrokes or typing faster. The fact that you've typed this code out is going to be at least half, if not less than half, the amount of, that's a bad way of phrasing it. The lifetime of this code, you're going to spend the majority of your time with this code, reading it, maintaining it, adapting it, modifying it. The amount of time you spend writing it on anything longer than like a weekend game jam is complete insignificance. So the fact that you spend 5 more keystrokes writing a setter or 2 more minutes making a file and properly creating some documentation is not a factor in whether you ship prototypes quickly or not. What you can do, we talked about that, need more flexibility, not less. But what you can do is avoid work in those areas that we've already talked about. By doing that, you can save time there and thereby get to a playable thing that you can playtest faster. So that's my theory of prototyping code, that it's an act of avoiding work. Let's look at now how that works in practice. What does that mean about our day-to-day work on prototypes? And before we do that, we're going to have a little diversion. We're going to talk about technical debt. So technical debt might be a phrase some of you are very familiar with, a phrase some of you have heard but don't really understand. My definition of it is that it's code or data that will slow down future contributors. And there's this credit card debt metaphor that's very popular, right? Where people think about the idea that having technical debt is very, very bad, just like having large amounts of credit card debt is very, very bad. And I would like you to think about things slightly differently. I'd like you to think about it in terms of a mortgage. Right? We generally think any amount of credit card debt is bad. However, mortgages can be very, very, very big. And we don't normally think that that's a bad financial decision. The bank's getting to charge interest on their loan, which they like. You get to own a house, which you like. I know is becoming a less and less familiar experience to people these days, but if you can imagine that future, the only time where having a mortgage becomes an actual bad idea is if you elect Liz Truss as Prime Minister and then your interest rates start going through the roof and then you're in a bad situation, right? And I want you to think about technical debt in the same way. I want you to think about this idea of code or data that slows down future contributors as a mortgage rather than debt, or it is debt, but rather than credit card. And as such, maybe we should talk in concrete details. What do I mean by this? What does this interest payment actually mean? And I think those interest payments fall into roughly 3 categories. The first one is friction. So, repetitive boilerplate or awkward legacy data formats or fragile systems that break easily. You're all familiar with this kind of thing, I'm sure. Rot, which is constant workarounds that accumulate cruft, that cause more workarounds, that cause more cruft. Or time bombs, systems that are perfectly usable and brilliant until the very moment that they're dramatically not useful anymore. And you know what? Some of the avoided work we've been talking about kind of maps onto this really well. Oh yeah, and it's important to note that, technical debt affects all contributors, right? I said it affects all contributors, not just a programming thing. It affects designers, in the sense that you can't get them the tool that they might need. It affects QA because you might not be able to get them the cheat that they need to test the game. Right? This is a problem that affects the whole team. But yes, so the avoided work that we talked about, those three categories kind of map onto these things. So like the voxel engine, the fact that it hasn't got proper tooling is going to provide a little bit of friction over time. The fact that we haven't got this ability to sculpt the landscape that we might have if we have a proper voxel engine. The fact that we're rebooting the server at midnight to get around memory leak, that's the classic early sign of a system that's going to fall apart with craft and rot later on. And the crafting system that we're just using storyboards, this is great until the moment that it's not, until the moment we actually want some depth and some gameplay in the crafting system, and then we have to throw this whole thing out. And so that led me to this realization, right, that maybe avoiding prototype work is the act of intentionally taking on tech debt. And if that's the case, that's great, because the wider software industry knows a lot about tech debt. It's been a thing that people talk about for 10, 15 years, right? There's a lot of knowledge out there about how to deal successfully with tech debt. And we can use that, we can steal that. And it kind of comes down to wisdom. It kind of comes down to knowing and understanding the problem facing it. Rather than saying, I don't like that system, it's got a lot of tech debt. Just something pejorative that programmers do like to use sometimes, just to say, oh, it's got tech debt, I don't like it. If we understand in detail what that tech debt is, what effect it's having on the project, what effect it's having on contributors, we can start to reason about it. We can start to ask ourselves what situations led to this appearing. We can start to ask ourselves, how costly is it to fix this? And how costly is it not to fix this as well? So if we take that approach, and they often do this for a thing called tech debt logs. So if we take that approach of like writing a log that contains all of our tech debt in a project, but we apply it to prototype debt, then we can maybe come up with something that might be useful. So we're going to make a database. So this whole talk essentially boils down to make a spreadsheet. I'm very sorry. Some of you are not sorry. Some of you are very excited about the opportunity to make one new spreadsheet. In our spreadsheet, we're going to have a couple of columns. We're going to have a category. We're going to talk about, is this known issues? Is this smoke and mirrors? Is this performance? And then we're going to have a category called work done. And in that column, we're going to note what we actually did. Not only what we did, but what kind of impact is this having on the team? And then we can think about that impact and give it a rating from 1 to 5, where 1 is, this is only kind of theoretically bad, to 5, which is like, this is disastrous, this is calling daily slowdown, and we need to address this right away. The next column is work avoided. So what did we intentionally, maybe, like most likely, we intentionally chose to avoid this work. What did we avoid doing? And now we understand what we avoided doing, what would be the cost of actually doing that? Again, from 1 to 5, where 1 is, this is only a few hours of work to do properly, and 5 is, this is going to take weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. If something is actually quicker than a few hours of work, maybe you should just do it rather than putting it in the log, but you do you. And then finally, we can come up with a computed column where we can calculate this priority number. This is a formula I like. This might be something you want to start with and modify over time to suit your purposes, but I like taking the square of the impact and dividing by cost. And that gives you this really nice surface where you can see interesting properties in, right? If something is high impact, that is, it's affecting the team day to day, it's slowing you down, it's always a high priority. It doesn't matter how expensive it is to fix, it's always a high priority. Whereas up here in this corner, this is where you want to be, right? This is stuff that's really expensive to do properly. You've cut a lot of corners. It's having a really minimal effect on the team. That's a really nice place to be. That's a really good way to look at this. And this is essentially your interest rate payments, right? As long as your interest rate payments are really low, then you're laughing. This is great. Everyone's winning. The bank is winning and you own a house. Down here, the removal men are coming to take the stuff out of your house, etc. So let's talk through some examples of the examples you've been using. This is smoke and mirrors. This is the crafting system. That's just a storyboard. So all we did was just slap some PNGs into the thing and put a couple of hotspots on it. It's really simple. And the impact here is relatively low. We did this intentionally because we didn't think this would impact us answering questions around movement and combat. So that's good, right? If you're making a new bit of prototype debt and this value is really large, you're probably doing it wrong. The work avoided, we don't really know what the next step of this prototype will be. We just know it will probably be more complex than this in some way. And so we can put some kind of number on there and say we saved 2. And that gives you a probability of 2, not great, not bad. Like, we can live with this. If they're all like this is okay. Let's look at the next one. Let's look at the voxel engine. So the work we did was just slap some static mesh cubes on the world. And again, it had a relative low impact, right? The frame rate is okay. The loading times are okay because we have big, beefy dev machines. But the work we avoided was going and looking at a real voxel system. And I've worked with some programmers that might be like, you know what, I'm going to do it this weekend. I'm just going to go and make you one. And I'd be like, no, actually, I don't want you to. This is such a foundational thing for the game. I want you to be slow. I want you to take it up. I want this to take weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. I want you to consider performance on Switch. I want you to consider what kind of tooling we need to generate here for artists and designers to be working successfully in this space. Take your time with this, right? And therefore, that's given us a really nice low priority. Remember, this is the place to be. We have done something that has minimal impact on the team, and it's saved us a whole load of time. This is great. Let's look at a known issue, the creeper. We talked about the creeper not being on screen a lot, so therefore we could just not do animations for him because you're going to turn and run away. And again, very minimal impact on the team because we've chosen to do this intentionally. Now, the work we avoided was maybe there's literally no animation pipeline in the game, so we avoided quite a lot of work, but probably there's some asset store stuff or previous title that we can just rip some stuff out of and get something in. If we wanted to, we could get something in relatively easily here. So I'm going to say a value of 2 for this, which gives us, again, a priority value of 2. Now, the important thing here is when you're working on your prototype demo, you're doing it with the whole team. And your whole team is revisiting these values over time. Like every milestone, every sprint even maybe, you're going through this with the entire team because prototype debt affects everyone. And you're making sure that these assumptions are still true. And you know what? It turns out we were wrong. The creeper's on screen a lot because you could just see him coming from a mile away from the top of your castle and he's just like sliding around there looks like he's from a different game. The art director hates it. And they're really angry. So you agree that you're going to raise the impact of all. That does not mean you made a bad decision in the first place to doing this. It just means your priorities have changed. And that's fine. So the priority's gone up. And at that point, you're like, 8's a pretty big number. We should probably look at this more closely. But you can do that in the context of your larger prototype debt spreadsheet, right? Where you can look at these values and you can start to build heuristics and rules of thumb, like saying, you know what, sorry, I skipped one step. So we've got this prototype debt log now, and we talked about taking our good prototype programmers and making them great. And what if they can start to use this tool as a self-reflection exercise to be able to see, hey, other programmers are producing this kind of prototype debt. If I'm not logging anything, maybe I should be. If I am about to log something, what can I do to make the impact lower and the work avoided higher? How can I, and then when you see someone else make a particular observation, you can ask them, what was your thought process to get you to the point where you were saving all this cost on the project? So it's really, really useful for individual programmers to look at this and help them improve. And then conversely, production loves a metric. And there's a whole lot of metrics there. So you can do stuff, rules of thumb, like if any priority passes over a certain threshold, that becomes a drop everything class A bug that we fix. Maybe it's not 8, maybe it's high, but still. You can also do interesting things like at the start of a sprint, if the median value, the middle value in the spreadsheet is over some threshold, we're going to work in some time into this next sprint so that programmers can work on the prototype debt and kind of tap things down because it's getting a bit out of control. And then conversely, what we don't want to do is empty the prototype debt log. What we want to, where the place we want to be is we want to ship a we want to finish working on a prototype with a debt log full of really, really low stuff, full of stuff that's really low impact on the team and really, really let us avoid doing a whole lot of work. We want to finish with that mortgage rather than with this concept that we have to have a completely clean state. So let's talk about a few critical moments in the cycle of the game, and I will have a sip of my Guinness, which has been sitting there the whole time staring at me. So here's a couple of tricky points in the life cycle of a project where this comes in clutch. There'll be a point where you need to go into the room with bad guys, the suits, and ask for some money. And you are enlightened because you've been to this talk and you understand that a prototype is a mess of half-answered questions because they're only about telling you what should our next prototype game be. However, this guy doesn't think that. He thinks, and it probably is a he thinks that a prototype is a pretty demo that plays nicely. And so you have a conflict there, right? You need to ask him for money, he needs to give you money. And you can't just send him a link to a GDG talk and get him to watch that before you produce your demo. So we're going to do two things. First thing we're going to do is we're going to slap prototype art and gameplay on the HUD as a watermark. That genuinely helps. And the second thing we're going to do is use our prototype debt log. Right? We can go through that with the eye of someone who's demoing this now to someone with money. And we can look at our different categories. And what we'll probably find mostly is that our smoke and mirrors things are mostly okay, and we can ignore those. Or we can leave them as they are. Similarly, for performance, we still know what kind of machine we're going to demo this on. Probably the suit won't even play it, they'll just watch you play it. But when it comes to things like the known issues, some aspects of it are not going to tolerate a square explosion. They're not going to tolerate a foot sliding creeper. So this area, you're going to want to pay more attention to during that time where you're trying to turn this prototype into a demo. It's important when you pass that phase that you make it clear to everyone working on the project, we're going back to the old system. Don't let people fall into the trap of doing more polish than they should be doing. But yeah, that's a really good way of using your prototype debt log to produce a useful demo. And then we talked before, so Darth Vader's given you a big fat check of briefcase of Imperial credits or something. The metaphor is really strange, but Star Wars is good, right? So you now have to face this task of taking this prototype and then shipping a production game. And I talked before about how this is a relatively dangerous point in a life cycle of a game. And I'm going to tell you about how I like to approach this problem. There are many ways to approach this problem. Right? The way I like to approach it using prototype debt is, first of all, deciding what does production code mean to us. And you might have a very good idea about it. But you might not, or the team might have very different ideas. Write stuff down. It might be like, oh, we have to hit a certain amount of documentation with a feature. It might be, it has to have dev cheats so it's really testable. It has to have a certain amount of automation in it so it's like automatable on the build server. All this stuff, right? Get that written down and then apply that rubric to your prototype debt log and to your prototype code. In fact, the best way of doing this is to give that rubric to someone who didn't work on a particular system of the prototype. Give it to them and then ask them to measure it up. Where do we come short? And then produce new prototype debt log entries from that. And I call these tech assessments. They sound a bit like code reviews because they are kind of code reviews, but they're code reviews that you only do once in a very big batch. And if you've never done a code review before, they can be a little intimidating to have someone look at your code and judge you. But just know that if someone reviews you, does a tech assessment on your code in pre-prod, and they come up with nothing, then you fucked up. Right? It should be full of stuff that does not make this production code, because otherwise you've done the prototype. Otherwise you've accidentally written production code. So you want people to be doing this. You want someone to go in and come up with a whole load of stuff and then clap you on the back and say, well done. Look how much work you avoided doing by not sticking to the production rubric. And then that gives you a really big, long, deep prototype debt log, even bigger than you had before. And you can just sort by priority and work from the top down. The one important thing to do, if you're ever in the situation where you're a technical lead on a project like this, is to make sure that you're preserving the momentum for the designers. They've just come off the high of getting a game greenlit, especially in this economy. And they don't want to twiddle their thumbs for 3 months while you work through the prototype debt log, right? So give them some programmer time to just make sure that the momentum is still going. But when you are working through this log, this can be a negotiation, right? This can be something you do in tandem with production, looking at your budget, understanding how much time, how practical is it for you to get through this thing. And maybe you knock out a bunch of stuff, but you leave a bunch of stuff as well, and that's fine. One game I shipped a couple of years ago was called Velodrome. It was a really great game, and it had a Unity coroutine in it. The start of the coroutine had 7 yield return nulls and a comment above saying, "I hope this is enough." And it was in the dialogue, right? We would look at it every milestone and we'd be like, "Should we fix this? We really want to fix this. This is kind of a butt of a joke, right?" It was an effect in the player experience. It wasn't actually manifesting a bug. So it stayed and it shipped. And the game won loads of awards. So it's absolutely fine, right, to take a certain amount of low priority prototype debt with you into production and carry that all the way through. So now you've done your pre-prod, you're in production, you're steaming ahead. You're getting features in, you're writing it towards your production code rubric, everything's great. And then one day a designer slides into your DMs on Slack and they're like, "I feel like just doing some messing around, I want to try some things. What if we just did a little bit of experimenting?" And some of you in the audience, some of you programmers who've been in situations like this, just a little shiver go up your spine. You're just a little like, "Well, you could have figured this out in the prototype. We just finished the prototype. Could you have not?" And what I want you to do instead is embrace this moment. Right? I want you to treat this as an aspect of game development that produces really great games. We did not have to answer the question that we were answering was, what is our next production game? It wasn't, what is every single aspect of our game down to the finest detail? We only had to answer just enough to get us to the point where we could answer that big question of what should our game be. So we are going to take some unknowns into production and we're going to put prototype in production. But here's the secret. Everything I've told you about this process so far has been in the context of doing this before production. However, the exact same thing works in production. You can just avoid some work, and then you can log that in the prototype debt log, and then you can do a tech assessment to get that to production standards. It works just as well. And this is the way, I think this is the way great games are made. Every great game I've worked on has done prototyping in production. Some of them follow this method, some of them is a bit more chaotic, but I think this is a really good way of doing it. The only important thing to bear in mind is that you want to ring fence things. You want to make sure if you start working in a system that you haven't touched in a while, you have a good understanding of, is this expected to be prototype code or production code? What rubric am I working to? And you might want to do that with namespaces, you might do feature switches and branches or whatever. It doesn't really matter how you do it, right? But you just want to have that ring fencing. But if you do that, if you let your designers experiment and prototype, if you log your prototype debt and you keep prototype debt under control, then you will finally ship a game, which is an amazing achievement, and you should be very proud of yourselves. However, do know that Minecraft is copyright me. I will pay you a £100 bonus for working on the game. Thank you very much. But that is the talk. Thank you. To quickly recap, prototyping is about answering questions. And we noted a whole bunch of characteristics of prototyping, which included things like prototyping stopping, not shipping, the audience of the prototype being very, very different to a game, to a production game. And that led us to this realization that we can avoid work through doing things like smoke and mirrors, known issues, and performance. And if we log that in a prototype debt log, it would not cost us in the long run to do this. We could use tech assessments to turn those into a production thing and then ship a very happy, very successful game. That's my talk. Thank you very much. You should come to Bob Indies next month if you're in the area. And if you want to LinkedIn me, you can LinkedIn me, you can Blue Sky me, you can email me, or you can shout questions at me now if you'd like to.
So does anybody have any questions? I don't just sort of take this
Let me put my deets back up just in case.
Right, I'll go around.
Hi there, yeah, great talk. How, in terms of like, in a studio setting or at least based on your experience, how long is the prototype phase? How long does it normally go for?
Yeah, I'm going to be horrible and say it's how long as a piece of string, right? Like, it's as quick as you can get it to answering your big questions. And your big question might be, what is our next production game? That was an example. Your big question could be, let's make some DLC for this game that already exists. But you need to get comfortable with the amount of uncertainty that you're going to have when you finally answer that question. Some people, first time they do this, are going to want to minimize the uncertainty as much as possible, and they're going to spend too much time prototyping. So you have to find that balance that works for you, that changes from studio to studio. So it's very difficult for me to say, oh, you spend 3 months of your 2-year cycle on prototyping. Because it might be you just can't find the answer, right? It might be that you're saying, like, what should the creeper do? How big should the creeper explosion be? And it just takes you a long time to answer that question. So, yeah, sorry, I can't really answer.
The reason I ask is because you took a sort of this game that you two were saying, oh, you have to spend like a week or two prototyping, otherwise you're already paid. I'm like, that sounds insane.
Oh, you're saying only a week?
Like a week, maybe two. I've heard like people saying like the craziest shit. Because that's crazy. Like in 2 weeks you don't get anywhere, I don't think. So yeah, no, thanks for that. That's very reassuring.
It depends on the scope of the game, absolutely, right? Doesn't it? Like a game jam can come up with in a game jam setting, you can come up with relatively useful prototyping that then informs the game in a matter of hours. Or it could be that your Ubisoft Leamington and you take 7 years. Sorry, James. Next question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you might have answered mine already, but what do you think the relationship should be between game jams?
I think game jams are a great place for ideas. But I then think, in my experiences, I remember when I was at the beginning, I was talking about my experiences in funded studios that have 10 people prototyping that are going on to have 40 people working on the game for 2 or 3 years. In those situations, game jams stop becoming game jams are the thing you do very rarely to generate a whole bunch of ideas. Ideas are cheap. Like probably your studios can generate a ton of ideas very, very easily. And so it's much more interesting to explore those ideas on a longer time frame. So to answer your question, specific numbers. Roller spent 9 months before Greenlight, maybe?
Maybe like 18 months.
Yeah.
Like ridiculous amount of time.
A long time. Yeah, and then 18 months of full production.
Before it happened.
Yeah, but this is a period of time when you're a smaller team, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you hit Greenlight, that's when Roller is scaling up.
How this works.
And there were, so there were times where I've worked at times at SpryFox where, a prototype would be rumbling for maybe 3 years. Not with someone on it full time, right? But someone would be poking at it for a couple of months, and then it would go get parked. We'll go work on production stuff, and then someone will come back and poke on it again, and it get parked. So yeah, and in that the context of game jams, there are I've never worked at a studio where we've used. I think people have. Double Fine comes to mind. Like Bossa comes to mind as a studio that uses game jams to great effect. It's not my experience. I can't say whether it's good or not. I've never worked at a studio that tries it massively.
Thank you.
So it's a cop-out, sorry.
That's good.
Right, so I agree with the Star Wars references. Question about the tech assessment period. Would you say it's a good idea to hand that to a game designer or similar non-technical roles so they can have an eye at it and provide things from their perspective, or would you think this is more of a problem if they start flagging false positives because dollars and you have production code works?
You're asking, should you give the technical assessment to non-programmers? Yeah, I wasn't really suggesting non-programmers. I was just suggesting programmers who haven't worked on the game. Right, in the context of a larger studio where you're going to be ramping this up, it's I would then bring on programmers who haven't worked in a particular system, or maybe I've got 2 programmers and I swap their systems for the tech assessment. And then by doing that, they bring a fresh perspective to what they're working on, to how this system matches up to production code. Could you, like, it's a valid point, right? Because prototype debt affects everyone. We talked about prototype debt that is not literally code, right? Things like the creeper not animating. That stuff is much more obvious. That stuff tends to get recognized during development. It's not really, that designer-facing, non-technical prototype debt doesn't tend to surface as much, I think, in the pre-production environment, because you've spent all this time playing and demoing the prototype already, so you know about those aspects of it. It's the fact that there's 7 new terminals at the top of a code routine. That's the stuff that you need to surface in the pre-prod. God, you worked on it, Alex.
Before you.
But you were before me.
Any questions?
Gotcha.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, you see to Alex and then.
No, but so I'll just talk loud. So all I was going to say is this: there was one thing in that which was wonderful, right? But the one thing that was, the one question I've got about it is that you seemed very keen on making the cubes have a very low number, and it's like once you hit that interface between prototype and production, the priority on that has to become infinite because you can't ship a game without a voxel engine, right? So like, what do you see what I'm saying? I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just saying, to me, that was a weird thing that you didn't explain that I wouldn't, wasn't it?
Yeah, so you're reevaluating the prototype debt log constantly. So the fact that you're not using a voxel engine is currently having a low impact on the team. But then as you're hitting pre-prod, it's in the prototype debt log, and you're reevaluating the prototype debt log, and you're saying, okay, in the context of pre-production, this number needs to be massive.
Yeah.
And at that point, the priority trips over into like, this must be fixed territory. And then also you can just use common sense, right? You don't have to be ruled by the spreadsheet.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying, like, if I was to sit and see this talk again, my brain would latch onto that same random point again. So maybe just make the number really big on that slide.
James.
I have so many questions, but I'll let it unfold.
That's the one.
That's
Got
8. The rest of them down as it goes.
Then you need to be anywhere.
I'll ask one at the bottom first, which is what kind of fix is done for the animation visualization one? When the creeper had an anim and suddenly, oh balls, we need an anim now. Is that a prototype? Let's just make it play the anim, or is that right? We need an animation graph, and what parameters do we need to expose to get the creeper animating? And do we need to have a speed and a jump and a fall over? Like, how many different parameters do we need? And at what point does that go from prototype design answering a question to going, can you give me an exhaustive list of all the possible animations we might need? Because we need to know what data to capture and expose.
Yeah, it's a good question.
What kind of fix do you get?
I think a large part of what you just talked about is a pre-prod question, not a prototype question. You've documented, with the creeper, you've documented the impact that's having on answering the questions. Eventually, one of your questions might be, how many anims do we need? How costly is it? This is a thing producers love to know, is how much will it cost to make this enemy? And then we can amortize that and say enemies cost X amount, and then we can decide how many enemies to have in the game, right? So at that point, the impact is we don't know how many animations we need. And so you can change the value then and reevaluate it. But you'll probably address asset questions like that in pre-prod in a very different way. That's something that producers are very used to doing. But there might come times in the prototype where you're working on the creeper and you suddenly, they had a very simple bobbing animation for a while because that was good enough to answer our questions. That was good enough. And then you've introduced a jump or a flight mechanic, and suddenly it looks shit again. And it looks shit in a distracting way that's going to stop you answering the questions as effectively. So then you reevaluate again and you add a little bit more, but you're only adding as much as you need to get to the next question. Right? Never saying, okay, well, we're definitely making a creeper, so let's go all in and make this production quality creeper in a prototype.
Depending on the kind of thing you're making, that can be very final as well. It could be a final thing that you think about again, because it's just embellishing. So it depends on how much the animation implies what you're trying. At least in my.
Yeah, it's true. Go on, did you have one more?
I have a second question, which is, what about documentation? Because you mentioned that prototyping perhaps was perceived as doing quick messy. Now it's actually, maybe we should be spending time on this. What kind of documentation do you produce? And
It's still, to be clear, it's still do it quick, but it's not do it messy. Right? It's not do public statics. It's let's avoid work in very clear and intentional ways so we can do this quick. So you were saying, like, what's the role of documentation in that? Again, it depends on the team size. In the teams that I'm working in, well, I have worked in my career, you have to start thinking about bust factor. You have to start thinking about that your enemy AI person is going to be on holiday. Right? So you want a certain, on a 6-9 month prototype, you want that certain level of documentation. That's one of those aspects of not cutting corners, right? Of not making public statics, of making sure that they're in sensible files with sensible names. That you also have documentation, you have good doc strings, you have good design by contract assertions, and you say whether this getter will assert if the value is null, and you have that stuff in there, so the code is easy to use, and so it's easy to reuse, and so it's easy to modify. So yeah, I think it's still important.
yeah, thank you.
Question.
Can I just say that what you mentioned about 18 months to 3 years of working on the prototype, actually that's quite a relief for me, because I feel like I have to be like a 10x engineer sometimes to smash out a prototype in like 2 weeks for it to be and that's what everyone's working at. But actually just those numbers give me quite a lot of relief. So that's what I was.
Good. That's the scale though, right? Like Roll7 are a studio that could have afforded, and SpryFox, they can afford to have 1 or 2 people working on a prototype for a long period of time.
I made one in a month and I thought I was being lazy.
So interestingly, we have worked on a few game jams, like company-wide game jams, which I'm not quite sure about because I don't think we really answer many questions, which is what you want to do. And we kind of get everyone in the company on it. So when you're doing like prototyping, I presume this is mostly just programmers and design, is it? I presume you don't really get, like when we've done in-house game jams, because we've got everyone in the company on it, we have to obviously, you art them up a bit, and also you end up with something that's kind of playable. But you spend like a week on it, and obviously you don't get much at the end of it. You don't really answer many questions, but you get some cool stuff, and everyone has a fun time. I presume this prototyping's like programmer heavy, and then
No, not necessarily, right? Like, if anything, the other way, right? Having more content creators, non-technical content creators on the project than programmers is more common in my experience. Because, if you're making games that are mechanics heavy, that are game feel heavy, we joked about creep animation, but animation and VFX and even sound, people neglect sound so much. It drives me fucking crazy when I see a prototype that hasn't got sound in it. I'm like, what are you doing? Why would you just put bleeps and bloops in, even if you don't get a professional, like, whatever. Like, it's such an important part of game feel that, yeah, you want those people in the project. You even want a UI that doesn't look complete ass, right? And you want, like, even if you're grey boxing, even if you're not texturing your environment, getting some nice lighting in is really quick and efficient and will make it look so much better than a plain Unity, file new sandbox. So yeah, like on the type of games that I work on, that is something that we tend to do, is to have more, maybe as many, if not more, non-technical content creators.
no, it's cool. Yeah, okay. So
The last prototype I worked on went on for a year, one programmer and about 5 different designs on it.
Did that ship?
From
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, we're often programmers, you know this, right? But we're often the bottleneck in terms of getting stuff done and in terms of budget as well. So yeah, it's useful if you can be as efficient as possible.
I'm just going to add on to the question.
Yeah.
Rather than anyway. So, with you said that programmers are often the bottleneck. to what extent, if you have a lot of content team, do they get blocked by being unable to try things, and perhaps the assumption that in a different engine, this was so easy, we could just do it in Unity for the game, the thing, and then you come to Unreal, Godot, a different engine, you go, yeah, it doesn't work that way though. And like, is there a certain, yes, you prototype without programmers, asterisk, they have all the tools they need to be able to build things.
Not without, but with minimal programmers, right? As few as what you want everyone as few as you can get away with. But one thing I really like saying to teams is that the programmer's job is to make the tools, to let other people make the game. It's not their job to, if you're working in a situation where you're getting handed a spec sheet and you're implementing stuff to a spec sheet and you're handing it back to a designer for them to like iterate, and then it has to go through that process, you're not going to get to that point where you're looping around that loop twice a day. You're never going to get there. You need to be exposing the sliders and the mechanics to the designers so that they can take that and craft interesting experiences. And so they can be an expressive tools as well, which is a skill. It's a whole skill to be able to design expressive tools in an efficient manner. Something that I'm not especially good at. I'm just good at hiring people who are especially good at that. And you want to be looking at making those tools to help the designers get on and do what they do best. And the same for the artists, the same for the audio people, and the same for QA. People neglect QA, especially in prototypes. They're like, we haven't got time to give you the cheats that you need, so you end up spending so much money on QA the game or QA the prototype properly, whereas you could just give them some cheats and they can be way, way, way more efficient. And this is a personal bugbear of mine, right? But they get so used to that mindset. QA, artists, designers, not so much in my experience, but maybe I've just been lucky, that they don't ask for things. And so you're working away happily, you're like, everyone's happy, everyone's doing stuff, and the designers and artists are pulling their hair out because they're so frustrated. This is one of the only things I don't like. I've been remote working since like 2014, and one of the only things I don't like is a situation you've developed where people are really frustrated with the tooling, but they don't talk about it because they have this mindset from the industry in general of like, you just shut up and you put up, and the programmers are busy, don't bother the programmers. And what I try and encourage them to do as much as possible is to shout and to tell me about their pain points, and to try and sit and watch them work sometimes, to be like, can we just share a screen and you do your normal work and I'll drink a Coke and I'll make some notes about the stuff that you're doing. And then maybe afterwards I can come up with some tooling to help.
So I had a question about the tech debt matrix that you and like, so I think it's really cool. It's a really cool tool. What kind of team size and funding do you say that becomes appropriate, or is it just like?
I don't. My experience in using it in team sizes of 1 to 10, right? But I don't see a reason why it wouldn't work, even for solo developers. Solo developers still need documentation, right? They still need to keep track of what they're working on. I don't think it's a bad idea to use this as a tool for yourself to try and keep in mind for yourself what state the prototype is actually in, because it's too easy sometimes to get involved and lost and actually think this thing is really good, and you hand it off to someone and they're like, this is a load of broken ass, and the creepers are foot sliding all over the floor. And it's good to keep yourself honest. I think it would be useful for a solo dev to do that. Haven't done it. I'd love for people to try it and then tell me how useful it was for them.
Question.
Something's come to mind because us catching up with a friend on studio last night, and we got talking about using AI to build tools. We were basically thinking like, that's the one area in games we think it could be useful in, well, not directly in the game, but they're saying like QMSR, we often ask for tools, but then we're way down the list of when it'll actually get built. It's like, is it going to be a good idea to use AI to do that in prototype, or is it going to cause too much mess?
This is getting a bit.
Did everyone become the wrong veg to put it on?
This is it's a, I don't know, like this whole thing has, especially recently, like for a long while, I was like, nah, it's not really going to be anything. It's all a bubble. People are saying 10x productivity is not really that. It's like producing slop and it's crap. And that's a dangerous argument because I think there are a whole lot of other reasons for not using AI. And if you depend your argument just on is this productive or not, then you're in trouble because it actually probably is now really, really productive. In the situations I've seen it being used. And I don't love that. That makes me a bit worried about what programming as a career actually is going to be. Because it's hard to argue with a lot. I've been working with a few studios, and those studios are in situations that probably a lot of you are in, where they're like, you know what, there's limited funding, there's a competitive market out there. If there was a tool that could give us 1 or 2 extra programmers on our team and give us that level of extra polish and that level of extra features, it would help us stand out in the market, and it would give us that tiniest slice more of a chance of success. And so it's very hard to talk to those people and be like, you know what about the environmental concerns? What about the copyright concerns? What about the fact that it's changing the industry for the worse? What about the fact that seniors, the juniors won't exist in 3 years? What about all that? It's really hard to look at them and then be like, well, what you should do is let your studio crash and burn as a fundamental stand against the AI billionaires doing this stuff. Like, it's really hard to ask them to take that. So having said that, to actually answer your question, is AI productive for generating tools and stuff? I think the stuff I've seen recently, yeah, it's really, really productive. I've seen producers who would normally not think of suggesting game ideas or not think of suggesting new design features, coming to the team with working prototypes that they've vibe coded it, right? And then they'll throw it away afterwards. But they've got something that they can communicate through asking something to someone for them to play. And that's extremely powerful. And I've seen artists and designers make their own tools, QA, make their own cheats to help them get through the game with human in the loop. In the places I've seen it, I'm sure those studios doing it haven't got a human in the loop, they've got an engineer in the loop on that stuff. But yeah. Terrifies me. But I don't think if you want that kind of benefit, I think that you can actually now see that benefit. If you're okay with it, and I would never say to someone, you shouldn't use it because you should let yourself go out of business rather than use it. I would never. Terrifies me if I said that. Yeah, because it's a weird situation. Does that answer your question? Was that the answer you expected?
Yes. You take that. So is it just going to make that mistake longer? That's the thing, isn't it? It's more clean work to do, but then for a start, because leave on it too much. It doesn't matter if it makes your list longer if you save it now.
It's true, right? Like if it's added low risk debt, if it's added high risk debt, but it was fast to fix, if it added all that stuff, but you got a deal and you wouldn't have got a deal otherwise. Yeah.
Funny enough, 3D stuff is not there or even close.
Sorry?
Funny enough, 3D stuff like modeling and texturing stuff. Texturing probably yes, but modeling is not. It's not there yet.
I haven't been keeping the early
Maybe it's kind of junk.
Yeah, it was for a long time. I wouldn't imagine if that hasn't changed. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, but code is now there, and maybe not like leave it alone and you can just produce. You can type in 3 sentences and have a game. Not there, right? But in terms of like give it to a senior programmer and they can be more productive, it is there.
Yeah, I've used it for tooling on my games. I'm just going to say it. Because it feels like I've not used the core of my game. I've used stuff that's out of line to help build it. But the discussion around it's so volatile. I almost can't mention it.
It's hard, right? But I understand why people are anxious. I'm anxious about it. I understand why other people will be really scared by it. I'm really scared by it. So I can understand why people get really, really emotional talking about it. So has anyone got one nice question? and then we can just get a beer and we can talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
As a solo developer, would you change anything with the concepts you've shown tonight, or is it mostly focused towards teams?
Yeah, like I said already, I'm presenting this to you in terms of my experience of using it in teams, and I would love to hear from people who have used it as a solo developer. I think there is value, and I think there is use. Yeah, you want a question at the front as well?
Yeah. Like I've never really produced a game in like actual like company. I can just like mess around with my friends. I can you just like make a game and it turns into like a game. Are you drawing like a hard line between prototype and production where you just throw everything away and then you remake everything, or does it just evolve?
No, I'm explicitly saying not that, right? I used to have a slide in this presentation where I talked about like doorways and hicks. So the two classical approaches to transitioning from pre-prod to production in larger studios is either a doorway where you just keep swimming and you're racing to see if your technical debt will bury you before you ship, right? And that can work, right? I'm not saying it doesn't work, right? If you have a really strong technical understanding of your project, if you have a really strong understanding of scope, if you're working in a situation where maybe this is the sequel, or maybe this is DOC, that can work, where you just kind of headlong go for it. But sometimes, a lot of the time it does. I've seen many situations where it hasn't, because that technical debt catches up with you, and then you're in a situation where you're defaulting on your mortgage. And the other one is Hicks from Alien, right? Where Hicks from Alien is like blow it up from orbit. And I've done that as well, right? I've done both of those approaches. I've done the Hicks where I was like, no, prototype code can never be production code, and nuked it all. This was on a SpryFox game, and it was a game with really good game feel. And I convinced everyone that this is the thing to do, that we're going to nuke it and we're going to write it. That's going to be so good. And I spent months and months and months recreating the experience from prototype. And I handed it off to the designers, who were bored by now. And they were like, it's different, it's slower. And I'm like, no, it's not slower. I went back and I looked at all the speed values, and I've written this code exactly the same, but better. It's exactly the same speed. And they're like, no, it's slower. And I was like, I got to prove it to you, this thing. So, and I went and added a lot of analytics to the game, and I was logging out speed over time, and I was trying to reproduce the same motions in both things, and then mapping out these graphs and being like, look, it's exactly the same. And they were like, no, Andrew, it's slower. And I went back and I looked at it a third time, and you know what? The camera was too close. And that's a really obvious, simple, like, gameplay programming 101 thing, right? The camera affects your notion of speed. But those things, getting the perfect balance of where the camera is, those little hidden nuggets will not be documented, and you will miss them if you nuke it and try and recreate it all from scratch. So I think that's why this talk talks about a middle way where you do a healthy amount of refactoring to address that prototype debt, but you're preserving the knowledge and experience from that prototype into production. Good, there's time for the bar.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much. Genuinely brilliant. Thank you very much, mate. Really appreciate that. Really enjoyed the talk and the conversation afterwards. So yeah, that is it. I'm going to put the QR codes up. Just keep them up, so if anyone isn't on the meetup or isn't on the Discord and wants to join, you can scan that. Otherwise, let's go have a drink and a chat at the bar. Cheers, guys. See you there. Thank you very much. Yes.
What these other people made, right? As it goes into what are the things that what was pointing at our entire project instead of making a new thing. I'm working in a studio and the designer who can't using code and not generating. We're getting to the point where he's like here's a branch, here's an experiment.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with Claude and Claude has done